The Old West had some wild hygienics and some that may or may not make sense. For example, not all beds in the American West were made of straw and hay, but many were. Such bedding wasn't changed often, leading to infestations by lice and other critters. Lice, or seam squirrels, were just one of the troublesome groups of insects that could make life in the Wild West less than hygienic. If you were a soldier during the Wild West times, our mattresses at the early frontier army posts consist of a cotton bag stuffed with straw, which was nicknamed prairie feathers. The straw was supposedly to be changed once a month, and files found that their way into food stuffings and human waste. Mosquitoes flocked into poorly insulated buildings, and as one member named Rose Pender, a visitor to the American West from 1883 to 1888, recalled one night when she tried to sleep, bugs abounded, I got very little rest. That was her Yelp review. She gave 3 out of 5 stars. Very few people had screens on windows, so bugs would make their way into homes and outhouses and back again, leaving remnants of whatever they picked up along the way. Not to mention, you'd have to have a chamber pot, as indoor plumbing was not utilized or invented efficiently enough in the Wild West, so you can imagine if you didn't throw out your waste from your chamber pot, considering it was under your bed, it would attract even more insects, bugs, and intensify the acidic odors and smells. Back in the Wild West, people had to get creative when it came to bathroom business, as toilet paper wasn't a thing for a long time, so they had to resort into using corn cobs, torn pages from magazines, and catalogs. It wasn't until 1857 that Joseph Gaiety introduced the medicated paper, but it was sold individually, not on rolls, meaning like one sheet each one. Roll-style toilet paper didn't arrive until 1890, along with the invention of the toilet paper holder. Dust storms were a formidable and unavoidable aspect of life in the 1800s American West, and the severity of these storms, as recorded in journals and diaries, often led to eye irritation, respiratory issues, and even livestock fatalities. The pervasiveness of dust and inside homes posed continuous challenges to settlers, affecting their health and living conditions. The impact of these dust storms offers a vivid portrayal of the harsh environmental conditions faced by settlers. It emphasizes the constant battle against natural elements and the resilience required to adapt and survive in each of this challenging landscape. And if you were a cowboy, you might come into town smelling of sweat, dust, blood, or just constantly smelling the way you smell, which included smelling like a horse. The tolerance of such strong odors in public spaces reflected the period, different attitudes towards personal hygienes and social norms, and it underscores the hardship of the cowboy life, where practicalities often overruled concerns for cleanliness. Cowboys of the Wild West, after long stretches on horseback, often carried with them a distinctive and pungent horse odor. The scent often became particularly noticeable when close quarters were made, especially in local bars where cowboys gathered for refreshments, and bartenders, those poor guys, were more concerned of the profit than the smell comfort paid by little minds of their patrons stink as long as they had money. The aspect of a cowboy life offers a realistic glimpse into the less romanticized day-to-day realities of the era, where personal hygiene often took a backseat to the demands of frontier living. And so when it came to showering or bathing, the popularity of public baths reflect on the social and economic realities of the time, where communal solutions were often the only viable options for personal hygiene. It also highlights the challenges of maintaining cleanliness in an era before modern plumbing and sanitation. In the Wild West, public baths emerged as a popular solution for the majority who lacked private bathing facilities. So these communal bathhouses, often through a symbol of cleanliness and socialization, often meant sharing close quarters and even the same bath water with other people. Given the rudimentary nature of soaps at the time, these baths could paradoxically expose patrons to more dirt and bacteria from fellow bathers than they had removed. And so in the Wild West, the lack of antiseptics and unsanitary conditions made even more minor injuries potentially fatal. A simple cut or abrasion could escalate into a serious infection or disease, with settlers especially vulnerable on the trail. This reality emphasizes the constant dangers faced in daily life, where even trivial wounds pose significant health risks. The threat of diseases like cholera from such injuries underlines the harshness of the era and the importance of caution and self-care. It also highlights the limitation of medical knowledge and practices of the time, contributing to the high mortality rates from what we know now easily are treatable conditions. While numbing the pain was a priority, the only solace came in the form of a sweet gulp of whiskey. And the lack of essential dental care resources meant oral hygiene also took a backseat to survival, and a pristine smile was a very rare gem. Toothbrushes were a luxury, and brushing one's teeth was an afterthought for many. And it gets worse, because it always does. When faced with dental issues like cavity or root canals, the remedies were far from sophisticated. Brace yourself, as the favored method was just simply getting barbers and even blacksmiths acting like makeshift dentists and just extracting your offended tooth with pliers. Women in the Wild West were often more conspicuous about personal hygienes with their male counterparts, or more than their male counterparts. Despite the challenges of privacy and limited resources, many women made effort to wash regularly, using nearby rivers and streams for basic cleanliness. This practice practice, alongside the advantage of being indoors, more often allowed them to maintain a higher level of personal hygiene compared to men. This gender difference in hygiene and hygienic practices showcases the early recognition of the importance of cleanliness among women, and it highlights their role in setting standards for personal care, even in a time where bathing and washing were not as so common in a practice. Cowboys and cowgirls of the Wild West era weren't just fashion trendsetters, but their choices of accessories served a dual purposes of practicality and hygiene-wise. Bandanas often provided protections against the gritty winds and scorching suns, and there's also another hidden benefit. In a time when the access to clean water and regular bathing was very limited, personal hygiene practices weren't always up to par, so the bandana, often worn around the neck or face, acted as a makeshift shield. Not only did they safeguard against dust, but they also aided in reducing the spread of germs and unpleasant odors that people so commonly came across the rugged days of the Wild West. And also, if you smelled, at least they can cover it up. In the Wild West, alcohol-fueled bar brawls were common, often escalating to very dangerous levels. The infamous firewater, a potential mix of burnt sugar, alcohol, and chewing tobacco, frequently ignited tempers over trivial matters. While many brawls resulted in minor injuries, some spiraled into deadly conflicts. This volatile environment where a simple disagreement could lead to lethal outcomes paint a vivid picture of the lawlessness and rough justice that characterized the era. The prevalence of such violent encounters in saloons highlighted the harsh realities of life in the Wild West, where disputes were often settled with fists or weapons rather than words, underscoring the perilous nature of social interactions during this time. In the 1800s, diseases like cholera, as I mentioned, was a major cause of death in the American frontier. The necessity to prioritize drinking water over uses like laundry and dishwashing exacerbated the risk of disease outbreaks. So cholera in particular claimed thousands of lives, affecting both settlers and indigenous populations. The arrival of European settlers in the Americas had a catastrophic impact on Native American populations, primarily due to the introduction of diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza. Native Americans had no prior exposure or immunity to these diseases, and they had suffered devastating losses, with some estimates indicating a reduction of up to 90% in their populations. This tragic aspect of colonial expansion underscores the lethal impact of infectious diseases in populations without natural immunity, highlighting one of the most significant and tragic consequences of the European settlement of the Americas. This grim reality of the frontier life underscores the vulnerability of populations to common diseases in the absence of modern sanitation and medical knowledge. It highlights the precariousness of life during this period, where everyday resources and practices could also mean the difference between health and widespread illness. The westward expansion of settlers under the banner of manifest destiny had a significant health implication. As they veneered into new territories, they encountered unfamiliar diseases to which they had little immunity due to poor living conditions. This exposure to new pathogens posed a significant health risk, often overwhelming their already compromised immune systems, and this aspect of frontier expansion highlights the unintended consequences of exploration and settlement on the health of the settlers, revealing the challenges and dangers they faced in unfamiliar environments. Hospitals in the 1800s, prior to the understanding of bacteria, often did much harm than good. The lack of sterilization of medical instruments in close patient quarters facilitated the rapid spread of diseases. These medical facilities intended for healing ironically became hotspots for infections and diseases transmissions. The conditions in these early hospitals reflected the limited medical knowledge of the time and the challenges of providing healthcare in an era unaware of basic hygiene principles. It illustrates the paradox of places designed for healing inadvertently becoming centers of illnesses, a stark contrast to the sanitized medical environments of today. Despite the advancements of medical science, some rural doctors in the 1800s continued to use leeches for bloodletting, based on the outdated belief that diseases were caused by excess blood. This practice, largely abandoned by academic physicians, persisted in smaller towns, highlighting the discrepancies in medical knowledge and practices across different regions. The continued use of leech therapy in some areas served as a reminder of the slow decimation of medical knowledge and the persistence of traditional practices even in the face of emerging scientific understanding. There was a time, of course, a terrifying epidemic known as syphilis swept through a population like wildfire. In a quest for a remedy, medical professions turned into a substance that hold the key: mercury. Despite the severe side effects, patients endured a grueling routine of daily applications of mercury ointment. This reckless treatment could last for years while unleashing many horrors upon the afflicted. However, people who are convinced the treatment was worth it, I guess now we wouldn't practice it the same, but at least we got better in self-care compared to parts of history. Speaking of history, that's all for today. Thank you for joining me. Be sure to like and subscribe. My name is Jess, and I wish you all the best.